Hello, I'm BC Kagan. I'm a photographer, and around 1979, I started photographing bands in Boston. I am reading this speech. People will wonder what I'm looking at. So I started photographing bands in Boston, punk bands, new wave bands, indie bands, alternative bands, you know, bands. And rockabilly bands and hard rock bands, but mostly kind of like um, what eventually at some point was called new music. And basically I became a rock photographer. Um, Recently I started recording a project with the help of Arthur Johnson of the Atlanta Johnsons. Arthur, you didn't say anything about it. Are you of the Atlanta Johnsons?
I am of the Atlanta Johnsons. That's true.
Um, what is it about Arthur? Arthur is best known as the drummer for the band Come. Do you want me to say it or are you saying it? He's also he's also
Uh,
the drummer for
Also the drummer for the Athens band Barbecue Killers, known probably for both. Yes.
Barbecue Killers. I said I wouldn't say that, but I am saying it. uh, Recently, oh, sorry. I already said that recently. Arthur and I both worked at different time periods for a store called Newbury Comics in Boston, which for the most part of the 80s was more of a record store, but also still a comic book store and kind of a pop culture store. And a few years after our first meeting, which was kind of Newbury Comics related, I used Arthur as a model for a fashion shoot in which I used Boston musicians, male and female, for a menswear magazine fashion spread. Today, we're going to be discussing my book, Shameless Distortion, which I self-published during the pandemic. And did I mean to say that? Today's recording is supposed to act as an introduction to our podcast project in which we plan to talk about Taking Tea with Monsters. Taking Tea with Monsters is my collection of stories that are mainly about my years photographing bands. Although some of the stories are from before I started photographing bands. And sometimes, could be about a band that I ran into when I went to get Chinese food. Sometimes they're outside the photographing, but mostly it's about the photography and working with bands that way. Some of the, oh, I have that somewhere. What did I do with that?
Oh, you have the actual Taking Tea with Monsters notebook?
No, I don't. That would have
Oh,
been a good
shoot.
thing. Yeah, we can do that for the next one. No, I actually have the book. Here's the book.
Oh,
Um,
so what? I have the book too.
well, that's not so what. That's great.
Okay.
There's the one person who bought the book.
No, many more have.
Many more have, it's true. So some of the stories from Taking Tea with Monsters collection. What does that mean? I used to call it the Taking Tea with Monsters collection, I think, are excerpted in a section of my book, Shameless Distortion. And I'm going to show you because I think the guy who designed this book did an excellent job. If I can find it. The section that's the Taking Tea with Monsters looks like this. They're notebook pages.
Mm-hmm.
I will
So those
admit,
are actually reproduced in the book as they appeared.
yes, right. So they're unedited in my notes about these stories. And some people seem to like that.
Yeah.
I am going to admit to you that through the magic of Photoshop and designers and stuff like that, my actual notebook does not have pink pages, but I wanted them to be pink.
Oh, that's so disappointing.
It is. Well, now you're prepared because I do have the book and I can show it. All right.
But did you really make little daisies over all of your eyes to dot your eyes? I assumed that that was real. No, I think I've thrown you with that one. Never mind. I figured if it had pink pages, you did daisies and hearts in the
Isn't that
margins.
the Britney Spears book that you were involved with?
Probably that probably was that one. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
no
podcast
daisies.
was ill-fated.
I don't really
Well,
think that, I don't think, oh, I
well,
do have, like, I do these, sorry, I don't know if you can see it. I do these like paths with my arrows, you know.
mhm. Yeah.
Really
All
the
your
only,
hand edits. I like it.
huh?
Your hand edits.
Oh, yes, my hand edits. Okay,
So you've already clarified a question I had, that Taking Tea with Monsters came first, and that was a book you've been writing recollections in for how long?
sorry to you. Arthur told me, I'm telling everybody, Arthur told me earlier today, after every question he asked me, I was gonna laugh.
Yes, I
And
knew it.
I think it's probably gonna turn out to be true, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Um, what gave you that idea, Arthur? I don't think that's true. I don't think Taking Tea with Monsters came first. I think Shameless Distortion came first.
Oh, okay. Well, then I was, because I thought because you had excerpted Taking Tea in Shameless Distortion, but okay, I was wrong. So Shameless Distortion was your first idea as far as a book.
Yes. I, yeah, I don't think originally these stories were gonna be part of the book.
Mhm.
Um, so did you
Well,
already,
when did you,
yeah, go
hmm?
ahead.
Well, when did you first come up with the idea, or when did you first decide you needed to publish a book of your photographs?
So I decided that very early on, which now, when I look back, really surprises me because I mean, I had some photographs, but not nearly as many as I
Hmm.
have now. And even like 35, 40 years later, when I started this book, The Shameless Distortion that we see today, um, originally there was only going to be like 30, 35 pictures in it. And there are, I should tell people who I hope are going to run out and buy it, um, there's like 135 pictures in the book now. So it is interesting that I really started thinking book very early on. Part of that might be that it's always, like people say to me all the time, oh, you should do a show. Yes, I have been in shows, but it's always been my endeavor to show my work to the most people possible. I mean, how many
Hmm.
people can show up at a show? I mean, a
Hmm.
few can. If you're Richard Avedon, a lot of people, show up. I know because I've been to some Richard Avedon shows, but if I'm, at my level of connection to galleries, and I have been in some shows. I've actually been in a couple of nice ones. I was in one in Italy that I didn't even get to go to. But uh, that's why I became a magazine photographer, because I thought the most people could see your pictures in magazines. So I think the book seemed like a natural progression. You can get the book out to a lot of people, and a lot of people can see the pictures. Um, so uh, also, oh my God,
So that was, I assume, then like mid 80s, late 80s that you were
not
first started
even
thinking
mid,
of it?
no, we're
Even
talking
earlier.
really early. Yeah, I think 80 or 81. So I told you there were several different efforts, several different versions, like trying, like, oh, maybe this will get me a deal. And I told you that one of those efforts, and this can probably be traced to her career. Um, Susan Orlean, the writer, and I worked at the Boston Phoenix at the same time period. I don't know when she left Boston, but I don't think it was mid 80s. I'm going to think it's kind of early 80s. And she did me the fantastic favor of introducing me to her book agent. She may have only done one book that at that point, and the book I remember was she had written a book about what people in America do on Saturday nights. Um, and yeah, so I'm not sure she had done anything else at that point besides her magazine and, the Phoenix work. Um, but she yeah, she hooked me up with her agent, who is still a book agent, but as happened repeatedly with, a lot of times people did nice things for me like that. Well, maybe not a lot, but several times some, kind of powerful or important people tried to hook me up. They liked my work and they also thought maybe it should be a book. Um, the book people, the publishing end, they didn't get it. I don't think they got the music. They don't understand the importance. It's hard to believe this now, but they didn't understand the talking heads of the B-52s or the Go-Go's, Bangles, all that stuff. They didn't get it yet, or even the Ramones. So they didn't understand that there'd be an audience for this book, or that people would want to look at pictures of these bands. And at one point, um, the publisher, the English publisher Faber and Faber opened a satellite office in Winchester, Mass. And I am doing my best. This is my best encapsulation of a story. But over a long period of time, they had these two beautiful archival boxes filled with 16 by 20 beautiful fiber prints of my work, which I submitted to them in hopes that they would, help me publish a book. They had bought photographs. They reissued a book called The Boy Looked at Johnny, which was written by two NME music writers, like maybe back in 77, like very early years, the English years. They had written a book, and then Faber and Faber was going to reissue it, and they wanted to supplement the photographs, and they bought some pictures from me. So I did have a connection to this publisher, and these beautiful boxes of, keep using the word beautiful, these boxes of my beautiful expensive prints sat in their offices really for months, could have been a year. And finally, I mean, they kind of avoided me for a while, and then, well, two things. At first, and there is a story later, but I won't talk about it now. But at that point, Pete Townsend was working as an editor at Faber and Faber in England, and the Faber and Faber in the United States. Those people said, we can't do any music books unless it gets run by Pete. We can't, we couldn't, he would get mad. So everything will have to have his approval. And the story that I'm not telling you now has to do with what I tried to do to actually show the book to Pete, which never happened, but I made an effort. But ultimately, the thing that happened with Faber and Faber is that they told me after those boxes sat in their offices that long, that they didn't think that people would be that interested in that many local Boston bands. Now, all in those two boxes filled with photographs, I really don't remember how many it was, but I'm going to say, could have been 35, 40 pictures. In my recollection, the only Boston band in all that collection was Mission of Burma, because I already considered them, and they really did have, a wide audience. People liked them near and far. And
Not even a Cars photo? There wasn't even a Cars photo in there?
oh, there may have, yeah, I guess I might not be, like the really, what people would consider mainstream. But what they were objecting to was like local bands. I mean, yeah, they're not objecting to, Aerosmith or the Cars. But yeah, I'd be very surprised if there were no Cars pictures in that box. But in terms of, what I knew as kind of the local scene, I mean, well, I was gonna say I knew Mission of Burma, but I knew all the bands. I mean, I knew the Cars too, so that wasn't, like, are these bands that she knows? Or are these actual famous bands? Anyway, it was just another heads up that I had been waiting to talk to people. I mean, they had reissued this book about punk rock, and I thought they'd be somewhat knowledgeable. There were probably bands in there that are referred to in The Boy Looked at Johnny, and they're still, I mean, I honestly, it probably was just an excuse to take get these beautiful prints out of our office because we're never going to do a book with you. So actually, I don't really know what Faber and Faber did while they were in Winchester, and I'm not really sure they're still there. I don't know. Anyway,
Mhm.
so then there was a version of Shameless Distortion that I was going to go to different music writers in Boston and get like like one of their favorite interviews of somebody that appears in the book and print that interview alongside it. And then the artiest thing that I did was based on a book called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, which was written by James Agee. And there were photographs by Walker Evans, a very well-known, what's that called? Like from the 30s, that,
WPA.
thank you, yeah, he was a WPA photographer. And and that book had been in my house growing up. So based on that book, I came up with this idea, and I spoke to a friend of mine, somebody that I knew who worked for a very famous publicist in New York, and I'd worked with him before, and he was also a music writer. He eventually went to work at Billboard. But I said, well, what if you write a story about a fictional band, and then I will publish it alongside photographs of these real bands. That was kind of the James A.G. Walker Evans concept. Is there's a
Mhm.
story and it isn't specifically about the photographs. And I still kind of like that idea. And he had a fictional band. I still can't remember their name. They had I still have the story. They had a hit song there. They were a very local fictional band, or some kind of fictional version of New York. And it was some kind of, I think in the future, it was somewhat futuristic, but it was very 80s because there were ninjas in the story. And one of the people in the band worked at a place called Kelp Cakes, or something that they were like, it's kind of like a Krabby Patty, but even before
Mhm.
Krabby Patties existed. And
Mhm.
and their song was Pigs Ate My Roses. That was their hit song, but I don't remember the name of the band. It was a funny story and I really liked it. I got really upset with the writer. His name is Drew, I'm going to say it. So I just spoke to him like last week. I was
Mhm.
really upset with him because every time I wanted him to just finish the story, thinking that I needed to finish story to present this concept, but you know, I don't think that's true. I probably could have just, gave the sampling, but I was trying to get him to finish the story. And every time he handed me something, it would be a newly re-edited version of the stuff he had already showed me, which,
Mhm.
I understand he was trying to refine it, but at the time I didn't understand it. I wanted it finished. Um, so yeah, I almost, by the way, this band that's driving me crazy, I can't remember. I could go look. Um, this story about this band did almost make it into Shameless Distortion, just because
Oh.
I did kind of, I just an excerpt because he never did finish it, but I did kind of like the whole concept and I did like
Mhm.
the story. And it's very 80s, as I was telling you,
Mhm.
the ninjas and stuff. I think ninjas were in the rehearsal spaces. I don't know. So, okay, I'm ending that there. You can go on to whatever
Oh,
next.
so we've completed the journey.
But have we not been talking for 2 hours now? Me?
No.
Have I been?
Well, I know I wanted to ask you, and maybe I sort of already did, but I wanted to ask you, what is the meaning of shameless distortions?
Oh, yeah. So it's not an S, just Shameless Distortion. It's
Mm-hmm.
singular. It's only one distortion
Mm-hmm.
in the title, but there are, yeah, 135 distortions. Shameless distortion comes from the fact that Sorry, okay, I'm not gonna touch it. I use a wide angle lens to take portraits. And that
Mhm.
is not a traditional thing to do. But the reason that I did it, and I guess continue to do it when I do take pictures, is because it allows you to stand closer to your subject matter, to be physically closer to them and get more information into the frame.
Mhm.
The downside is that it does create distortion when you use a telephoto or what's known as a portrait lens, like an 85 millimeter or a 105. Those are kind of portrait lenses. Yeah, it doesn't, you don't get the distortion. You do have to stand away from your subject matter, and so you can imagine, like, from 28 to 85, that's a pretty big gap. I mean, not
Mhm.
even if you don't know about optics, just number wise, there's a few numbers in between that. So, um, so that is what the shameless distortion was, because I was perfectly happy to have things distorted, and the distortions show up that, if somebody is sitting and their hands are like on their knees, their hands can appear. I mean, it's not going to come out and smack you, but if you're really looking at the picture, you might go, oh, their hands kind of look big. Do they have really big hands? Or, their
Mhm.
feet looks different, or, depending on where they end up in the photograph, I'm parking back and forth, because if they end up in a corner, their heads can get like pointy. So you
Mhm.
got, if you're taking pictures of like 5 people in a band and somebody gets up into the corner, yeah, they could be, there's some distortion there. But it was shameless in that I thought it was fine. I thought it was fine to have it. It was a perfectly acceptable trade-off to be able to be closer to people, get, more in the photograph. And also, I liked the fact that the type of music that I worked around, punk and new wave and, other kind of indie-ish, indie type, um, that guitar distortion is part of that music a lot of times. And so and that's shameless too. That's done certainly on purpose. It's not like, oh, geez, I would have liked that song better if it was really clean guitar. No, this
Mhm.
was done on purpose and it was shameless. So yes, that's the connection, and that's
Hmm.
the reason.
And what about taking tea with monsters? Can't remember if you've talked about that on camera.
But I'm about to.
Mhm.
So the taking tea with monster stuff does come much later, because I actually think I have a notebook that I had started to write these stories in, and I think I'd already been writing the stories for a while. And you know, this is just the way my memory works, but I kind of remember like sitting on my bed, and although I don't exactly remember, I was either reading a book about the Ramones or I was watching, there was a documentary about them called End of the Century. I might have been
Mhm.
watching that. But what happened is that while I was watching or reading, I was like, wow, these guys were really awful to each other. And, it's bands, being in a band is a lot like being in a marriage, and it's not a surprise to people that, people in marriages fight. And
Mhm.
so hence people in bands fight with each other. You just have a couple of more people to fight with.
Mhm.
And usually, unless you're in a duo, like the Everly
Mhm.
Brothers, then you only have one person. um, so um, I was like, wow, this is really, these people, even how they're treating each other, like it's a part of their character that I didn't see very often at all, and considered myself at this moment of epiphany, if that's what it was, to be very lucky, is that for the most part, people were pretty civil with me. Um,
Mhm.
because I probably would have been really freaked out, and maybe it would have affected my ability to go on if people were horrible to me. It happened a couple of times. Um, that somebody was awful, but not very often. And there is, I was saying to you, it's like, yeah, I did work with a lot of Englishmen and some English women, mostly Englishmen, and I'm a Bostonian. So it is not, I don't think it's surprising that the concept of taking tea as a very, sorry, civilized thing, um, came into mind, like that I was taking tea with these people who could be monsters. They were
Mm-hmm.
monsters. And I, I think in this Ramones realization, I told the story to Arthur that Dee Dee Ramone recorded a hip hop album. I don't know the year, but of course it can be researched, and hopefully some people who are listening to this right now know exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I don't even know the title of it, but Dee Dee came to New York. Oh, he was in New York, I guess. I don't really know where the Ramones were living at that point, but or even if the band was together. But anyway, Dee Dee was doing publicity for this hip hop album. And I was given a lot of time with him. I spent, I don't know, maybe an hour, more than an hour, kind of walking around like the Chelsea area of New York, doing pictures with him for this album. I wasn't hired by him, but yeah, but it was set up by his publicist. Anyway, he was so nice. He was so accommodating and sweet. And I had met the Rollins before. Look behind me.
Mm-hmm.
I had
Mm-hmm.
photographed them a couple of times. I found them actually as a band kind of standoffish, for me anyway. I'm sure they weren't for everybody. But um, I didn't engage with them when I met them as a band, but when I was with Dee Dee, it was much more friendly and much more interactive, and he was just sweet as pie. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
that is where I was taking tea with Monster to really get the thing is that, yeah, you can read in places that Dee Dee could be very badly behaved. He had
Mm-hmm.
drug problems. I think they all did. I mean, they all being the Ramones. Um,
But you never saw any negative interactions. I know you said you didn't get any from them or other musicians necessarily towards you in general, but what about between them? Would you see fights between band members, and would people be on their best behavior when they were with you in terms of their interactions with each other?
I'm going to say mostly best behavior, because even exposing other people to that, kind of aggression is aggression.
It
So
can happen though.
yeah, if
I mean,
you,
I can tell you from personal experience, it can happen.
um, yeah, um, I was also in a band. Anybody who doesn't know that I was also in a band, I'm just saying from my personal experience, but my band experience very short-lived. Um, the only screaming and yelling which used to happen between me and my guitarist Tim, um, uh, only happened when we were alone. We
Off
didn't.
camera.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although my most famous fight with him, which I think I recorded in
You
Shameless,
talk about it in the book.
yeah, and there was a taxi driver as a witness, because
Oh,
I think he was getting in
I
a
don't think
cab.
that comes up in the book.
Oh, it isn't, because yeah, I think I was trying to get a cab, and yeah. And that's when he told me, I just told the story this week because I love this story, even though it was horrible. We were screaming. I mean, talking about husband and wife, kind of, we were screaming at each other outside the rehearsal space in Kenmore Square. And he said to me, your singing is ruining this band, which is hilarious because I didn't sing in the band. And I do think that that's what he was trying to say, but
that that you needed to be singing as a contribution to the band.
yeah. Well, he saw me as a potential female Bruce Foxton. That's what he wanted from me. You're laughing. Thank
Oh my
you.
God. I just love the reference.
No, I'm not
Could
kidding.
could you jump
Read these
super
records.
high?
Listen to this, do this.
Hmm.
Um, and you
You know,
might,
I've seen photos of you from then. I could say you might have had a bit of a Bruce Foxton haircut back then.
yes, I did, but that's not a tribute to him or me. Uh, but I do love Bruce. I mean, he's an amazing bass player.
Mhm,
Um,
he is. And a good singer.
well, there you go.
There you go.
That's not who Tim had. He had me.
Yeah.
Um, I did do some singing on our hit record. Well, I'm getting a far field of the screaming matches you had in Come or the Barbecue Killers.
Uh, we had some disagreements and sometimes in front of other people. Yes.
I
With
can't even,
probably both bands. Yeah.
I can't, I don't want, I mean,
It's
I,
sometimes, well, when especially, back when I was in our original active years, I was still youngish. I was 20s and 30s and or so you're immature and your emotions get the best of you and things get frustrating and it's hard to control it sometimes that you can't keep a lid on it. So,
yeah, definitely when you're younger, the wisdom of, yeah, I'm just not going to say that.
yeah. Yeah.
You definitely think, oh, I've got to say this and I've got to say it right now.
Sure. Absolutely.
Um, honestly, I don't know what I said to Tim when he said your singing is ruining the band. I didn't laugh, even though now when I tell the story, I laugh every time because it's hilarious. Um,
Hmm.
and the first time I got a laugh for saying that I was supposed to be Bruce Foxton. um, so yeah,
All right.
what question was I answering just then?
I think we were talking about where Taking Tea with Monsters came from, the name.
Oh yeah, and that you and I guess also have a little bit of monster in us.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
Um,
probably everybody does.
I don't know. So I think you touched on it, but I know you've emphasized to me before that in conceiving the book, you were thinking of it as a photography book, not a rock photography book or not a rock book, that it was more, you wanted to emphasize that you had a lot of,
Sorry, I'm just looking at the clock now.
oh, okay. But you emphasize
Oh,
that, the photography aspect is what was the most important, not that it was about bands per se, even though,
it's
uh,
obviously Vince.
yeah.
So yes, it is a very important point. I think, you know, it might be a hard concept to get, but I think when you're looking at the book, it helps to know this, that I produced this book as a photography book. That was the main thing, knowing full well that most people would see it as a music book. I mean, bands are my subject matter, so obviously, that is, um, it's, it is about music in terms of that. But I was trying to produce a photography book. The photographs and photography um, were my main motivators and how guided how I made decisions, visual decisions in the book and choices and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I knew that this, was going to be, um, I knew it was going to be a challenge. Yeah, I was going to say I didn't know how much of a challenge it would be for me. I
Hmm.
thought it might be difficult for people, but I think I was feeling like, well, if I do a good job putting it together visually, then maybe people will just enjoy it and not notice that I did that.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, the people that are looking at the book for the bands, they won't go,
Hmm.
"Oh, this is odd." But but it turns out that, a lot of people who like music are very connected to the history of these bands and
Hmm.
where they played and when they played. And is this the time that we were going to talk about Tillman?
Well, I was just thinking about that. We're sort of leading up to how when you actually because you've talked about the few publishers that you were trying to work with to get a book together and that didn't work out. So at some point you reached the decision, I'm just going to do it myself.
Well, yes, and because, I mean, this is a sad thing, but my mother passed away in 2016, and she left me a little money, and I decided um, the best thing to do for myself in terms of my work would be to just do this myself. I had been, told, I haven't outlined every time I made an effort and went to somebody with the high hopes that they were gonna go, yeah, that seems like a great idea. And a lot of times what the response was, well, yeah, a music book, that seems really good. Well, maybe we'll contact a bunch of photographers and we'll do this thing and we'll let you know. And I'm like, I didn't come for you to you for that. I want to do a book of my work, not with other photographers who I may or may not want to be seen with. So yeah, I decided this is our, the tradition. This is part of what I was part of. This the DIY thing. Can't get people to put out what you want, you put it out yourself. And I will tell you that Tim, the guitarist from Swingers Resort,
Your band, which I don't think we said the name of before, but
oh,
that
yeah,
was
my
your
band
band.
was called Swingers Resort. And
Mhm.
Tim Hayes, well, I don't want to talk about his personal history, but the band's personal history is that Tim's mother paid for our single, to
Mhm.
produce our single. I mean, that's, so
That's what parents do. My dad bought my first drum kit for me.
no, there you go.
Yeah.
So it does, um, you know, it can help the DIY.
Mhm.
I don't know that my mother would have approved, but she wasn't
Mhm.
around to do that, except
Mhm.
maybe, spiritually. So,
So
yeah,
you decided to do
so
it
I
yourself,
decided to do
so
my own book, yeah. And,
and you knew you needed a designer, I assume.
well, yes, and it is kind of part of some of the story that we haven't, and maybe won't get a chance to touch on, but um, I actually started out with a designer, and this was around the time that the book was much smaller. It was more like
Mhm.
35 pictures, but and this was before COVID. I was, was working on the book, and I that it became clear at some point that that designer was not right. We weren't working well together. It wasn't going smoothly.
Mhm.
And well, this is embarrassing because I meant to Google this, but one of the guys in the Bongos, a very well-known Hoboken band,
Mhm.
well, they were in Hoboken. They're not in Hoboken now, but one of the guys from the Bongos had a friend. He said, "Oh yeah, my friend Tillman, he'd be perfect for this," and he hooked me up with Tillman, who turned out to be perfect for this. But
And
we had fights too.
Tillman based in Hoboken or New York or?
No, Tillman is. Uh, I mean, he lives in upstate New York, I think.
Mm.
If I'm, I've never met him. We did this,
Oh, that's interesting. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
not face to face.
Yeah. That-
Yeah, we did this all on the phone because I don't even know how to do Zoom. He probably does. We didn't even do Zoom meetings. We did this all on the phone, and
hmm.
we still had some pretty good yelling matches.
That almost seems like when playing chess over by mail or something, where you're just like sending a move back and forth.
Yeah. So what happened was, um, I, I'm just gonna, okay. What happened was is that, I Tillman understood when we started that, I told him that for me, this was a photography book. And I understood um, that how people were going to feel, that whole thing that I told you. And Tillman is a musician. He is a graphic designer and a genius at Photoshop. Whew, unbelievable. And uh, and he was like, yeah, and he really seemed to get it. our early
Mhm.
conversations were great, and I was like, this is fantastic. And and
And
um
like you said, this was still, in your mind, it was still only going to be maybe 35 photos. It wasn't going to
I think
be
it was
as
already starting to
expansive.
grow. It had
Mm.
already started to grow into more. Um,
And you already had at that point, when you say you were thinking of the size of it, you had specific photos in mind or at that point that you wanted to include in it, or were you
yes,
still
I
working?
probably
Yeah.
most of them, but then
Hmm.
yeah, then that started toward the end of the production. I started to fill in with, oh yeah, I really, and if I can, yeah, because sometimes it's about the research, it's about finding the prints. And during the pandemic, my work, my negatives and prints were in two different locations, and I couldn't go anywhere
Hmm.
because I'm vulnerable. I didn't go anywhere for 2 years and hardly go anywhere now. Uh, so, so some of my stuff was not available to me, and I was trying to, do the best with what I had. I do have a lot of photographs.
Hmm.
So I'm just going to finish up only because I think we might be getting to the point where we need to wrap up. Anybody
Hmm.
timekeeping besides me? Because I'm not doing a good job of it.
I thought we were only about a half hour in, but I could be wrong.
Did you know when we started? Were we allowed to talk about this? Yeah, this is all going to be part of the record.
That's right.
You
Why don't
think
we keep
half
going?
already?
I think we can finish up about Tillman, and then we can take a break.
Okay. So, so what happened with Tillman is that as we got to know each other, it became more obvious that he's like a music history buff also. He's one of
Hmm.
those people that reads a lot of books about bands.
So
And
annoying.
not when you're trying to sell books about bands, it isn't.
Hmm.
So, um, and I had said to him, look, you know, I was taking pictures. I admit that I didn't keep records of, where I was certain days and what venue it was. I don't have all that data. Um, but I,
Have you ever come across photos you actually don't even remember who the band was and you don't have a note about
oh
it?
yeah, yeah, I have some of those.
That's so
And
sad.
yeah, I've tried to think about some way to, um, put those online so people go, oh yeah, I know who that is, which would be
Hmm.
great. So anyway, I said, look, I think it's fine. If I go like, well, this was taken circa, 1981 or 82, and I think it was at the Channel, or I think it was at the Paradise, it's fine because this is not a history book.
And
And
you were not arranging them chronologically. There
I
wasn't
would,
any
yes,
concern
I
about
was
that.
just,
Yeah.
oh, really, you just Edie said with me. I
Yeah.
just, um, I was just about to say that, yes, I also told him, and I don't think he was honest with me. He was like, okay, but I think in his heart of heart, he was like, what? I said, yeah, this is it's not only there's no chronology, if that's the right term for this, but also I'm not putting the rockabilly bands and the, ska bands and I'm not,
Hmm.
none of that stuff is happening. This is all about the photographs. And as I was explaining to you recently, I could have produced a book where there was only one photograph facing a blank page. Ideally, the way I like to show my work, I like people to focus, on an image and not have another image distracting them. But
Hmm.
that would have been much more expensive. I would have either had a lot less photographs in the book, or I would have had to pay for a lot more pages, and more shipping. Everything, goes up in price. So I decided that, and that was a big part of my work. I felt like the biggest challenge was picking the pictures that would work together and
Hmm.
how I see them working together. And almost, if you get a copy of this book, and I really think you should,
Hmm. I agree.
you can see, because I'm telling you that they're put together by mostly visual cues about the photographs. There is a photograph in the book of Robert Fripp, and it's a cross from a picture of Joe Ely. I don't know if those two guys know each other. They do both play guitar.
Mm-hmm.
But you wouldn't normally put them in a category together. But there is a visual cue of why those pictures were put across from each other.
Can I show the spread?
Oh, sure, yeah, that makes sense.
Is that a good visual of it?
Yeah, what happens when I point to what's it doesn't work?
Yeah, that won't work. Is there
So,
something you'd like to say about those?
yes, I'd like to say that the way I'm facing it, on the right is Robert Fripp, kind of hanging over a balcony in a motel, which now these days, that is a very old version of the hotel in Boston that's now known as the Verb.
Mm-hmm.
And across from him is Joe Ely, looking like he's in a West Texas diner, but in fact, he's in a coffee shop in Dorchester. Um, and, but why the pictures aren't together, which may surprise you, but I thought this was the key thing, that you will see that the banister of the, the wall that Fripp is leaning on goes right into the countertop. It almost, butts
Mm-hmm.
the countertop of that Joe Ely is leaning on. It's like the
Yeah,
V shape that is created by those two photographs.
it's cool. Yeah, it's a good pairing. It's a good
Show
pairing.
me another one. Just show me a random one, and I'll tell
Oh,
you.
and you can just see if you can tell me why they're together.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Here's one with Lena and Iggy.
Oh, um, I really like that picture of Iggy Pop, and I'm never sure that other people do. But
I
I
like it too.
say, huh? Did you just say that you really love it too?
I did.
Oh, I didn't hear it. I just kind of put that in there. I think that so across from him is Lena and Thomas Dolby and Les Chappell, who is Lena's, I think they're married.
Yeah, I think so.
Her
Her
guitar.
guitar player. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the reason that they're together is because it looks like Iggy is looking at them.
Yeah, I was just looking at that aspect of it. When you look at the spread, they're interacting with each other like that.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Yes.
And she also, I don't know if that was part of your intent, she's leaning towards him, which I like.
Yeah. She thinks she's leaning toward Thomas Dolby,
Yeah, she does, but it's Iggy.
but
Iggy is the
Iggy,
magnet.
yeah, I guess. Yeah. Mm. So I don't know. I could say stuff. No,
Mhm.
Iggy is one of those people. I got a few people. Um, I that picture was taken at an in-store signing at New England Music City, which was a record. I think it's a Little Peach now, or was when I left Boston. Um,
Well, I don't remember that story. That must predates me.
yeah, I think it did. I think it does. Um, so I spent the entire signing, which went on for a long time because it's Iggy. There were a lot of people lined up. And I was in very close quarters to him. He was, you see the counter that he's signing at. There's just a little area behind him. And I was like almost right on top of him. And this is one of those times where I'm so close to somebody, excuse me. He never made eye contact with me, never said anything to me. And I was right on top of him. I
Were
mean,
you
it's fun.
taking, but were you taking photographs the whole time?
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, I mean, it wasn't that, you know, wasn't that great a setup for photographs, but I did take some and I really like that one. But that one is, I mean, it's partially about Iggy, but it's also about those guys and all the hands coming in and the Sharpies and,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
also, yeah, New England Music City is a historic place for those of us who were around when it was still open.
I also like it because it's glamorous because it's Iggy, but it's not glamorous, the setting and
No,
everything. It's so just like this is what being a musician on tour is like.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that is kind of a, thank you, because that is kind of a thing that I think is a theme of my work, that I'm trying to show people, yes, these guys are special. You love these bands and you look up to them, and you try to emulate them as people, and you want to know what they ate for breakfast and all that stuff. But on the other hand, they're just guys.
Mm-hmm.
Just like regular people, and there is and I'm, trying to show them, I think, more the regular people, but I'm not just trying to show them as regular people. I want the thing that is special about these people to come through that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it does, in my personal
Mm-hmm.
opinion. Um, and, uh, and I think it's tied to this. The other thing that I'm trying to do, and I think it's one of the things about using the wide angle lens so that you're seeing a lot of the room and stuff, is that I'm trying to give the viewer the experience of being in the room with the B-52s,
Mm-hmm.
to actually be where I was, to share that with me when they're looking at their picture, because I think that would be cool if you
Mm-hmm.
could be there. Um, I'm just going to do one like throwback to, one of the things that I talk about is that a lot of rock photographers come to rock photography by being fans. They're going to a show. This goes into the whole live thing. They're going to a show and they think, oh, I'll bring a camera and I'll take pictures. That'll be fun. Uh, and so they come to music photography through the music. But I started doing music photography coming from being a photographer. I had just, when I started shooting music in Boston, I had just left school at the University of Texas, studying from one of the most famous American photographers of the late 20th century. I had the pleasure of being his student. And when he told me to leave school, he said, go somewhere and find something interesting to shoot.
We can mention his name again.
Huh?
We can mention his name
Oh,
again if you
his
want.
name was Garry Winogrand. Well, sometimes I
Yeah.
like to keep it a secret. Um,
So when you got to Boston,
I was, looking for something interesting. And I really don't think Boston, I mean, Garry has some connections to Boston. I'll just tell you, there was a story about running into him in the book, about running into Garry in Boston. But I think he was surprised, because when he gave me that instruction to leave school and to go, he said, go back to New York, which is essentially kind of where we both came from, although I am a Bostonian by birth. And he probably knew that because of my accent, my speech pattern, as my mother used to say. And he said, go to New York or go to Los Angeles. He said, that's where I'm about to go, because he thought, he was getting ready to leave Texas and he thought stuff was happening in LA, and that's what he did, And then he said, or go somewhere where you think, so, so it was the or at the end. And
you
I
jumped on
think
that.
that when he saw me in Boston, he was like, I didn't mean this.
Hmm.
Um,
Maybe he just was totally surprised to see you at all and like, wow, I've run back into one of my former students on a random, because weren't you
no,
in your car and he was walking in front of you or something?
yeah, he was crossing the street doing what he is famous for doing. He had a camera in front of his face and he was taking pictures along Palm Avenue where, if you know Garry, there were no people around. Like, I don't know what he
Mm-hmm.
was photographing. Um, but
Hmm.
I'm sure he could, I mean, maybe a random person would come by. But no, I actually that was one of two, like, really kind of, the universe is, this is too much of a coincidence kind of thing. And that was one. I had two meetings with Garry that were not in Texas when I was studying from him, and after I was studying from him. And the other, I'll tell it now because I'm already saying it. I think Garry was already kind of, he may have already told me to leave school. And what happened was, is there was a lag time. I think he was like kind of annoyed because I didn't leave school when he told me to, but he didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize that financially I was living on student loans and work study and I couldn't leave school. I had no way to
Mm-hmm.
support myself yet. So I was still trying to figure it out. And I had the opportunity to visit a relative in Los Angeles. Yeah, I'm not really sure about the timing of, he might not have told me to leave yet, but at any rate, I went to him and I said, I want to go on this, we were in the semester, and I said, I want to, go on this trip, but give me an opportunity to take pictures in Los Angeles. Yeah, this is probably before he was hot on Los Angeles. It gave me, I could have some opportunities and blah, blah. And I could tell he wasn't like, yeah, that's great. He was more like, "Oh, all right." It was more like, oh, the dog ate your homework. Okay. So, uh, so I went off on the trip, and when it was time to leave, my relative, who was my father's side of the family, and my father and my mother at that time were long divorced. But my father's sister, who I was visiting in Los Angeles, said to me, if you want, I will pay for you to fly to New York to see your mother, a woman that she did not like. But it was still generous of her to say, I will fly you there. Of course, your mother's going to have to get you back to Texas to go to school, but if you would like to go to New York before you go back to school, I will send you. So I said yes. And I went to New York. And while I was in New York, my older sister Leslie, and I were walking around the village, and we were walking down A Street and standing. Now, as far as I knew, so this was the interesting thing. Garry, last he heard, I was going to Los Angeles. Last I knew, Garry was teaching in Austin. So I'm walking down A Street with my sister, and there's Garry standing in a doorway. Yeah. Which was, yeah, really odd. And there is a whole section of thing, Garry had a book called Women Are Beautiful. His relationship with women and his relationship with women as a photographer is, it's part of his thing. And I think he found my sister very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she's only interesting because she's a slightly older version of me.
Of course,
Otherwise,
of course.
Has no significance. Anyway, so yeah, that had already been like, wow, this is like of all the gym joints or whatever, like, how could that have happened? Because I definitely was not supposed to be in the West Village, and as far as I knew, he wasn't either. He
It
probably
was
went
kismet of a
to,
sort.
he went to the head of the art department and said, the dog ate my homework. I gotta go to the West Village and
He
take care
probably
of it.
said, this is my time to go to New York because I know BC won't be there. So
I
and he
wasn't
was,
BC then. I didn't
oh, well, I
know.
wasn't sure what you'd prefer I use. So
Yeah. Sorry. And again, I am now just going to say very briefly about the BC thing, because this is actually from around that time. I remember driving in the car with my mother, and I had already decided that I didn't want to use my name as a photo credit. And I had always kind of been known, because I've never been that crazy about my first name. I'd always kind of been known by B or BC. I think my sister called me B for years. And people also called me Kagan. So there was that going. I was trying to figure out, and my mother, again, to go back to the divorce, really surprised me by saying, well, what about being Kagan? And which surprised me because that's not her family name. It was my father's name. And I was like, yeah, I think I had even thought about that, because I like the name Kagan, and if I'm going to use it as a first name, I don't want to get rid of it as a last. So that did, and it was very, it's kind of a Duran Duran.
or
And
you could have just been Kagan, like Ouija was just Ouija. You could have
yeah,
just
no,
been Kagan.
I didn't feel I could do that. But I think at that point, the Kagan was not from Duran Duran, the band, but from Duran Duran, the character in Barbarella.
Right.
Because I don't think the band existed yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I, yeah, didn't feel bold enough to be Kagan. It seemed like too much of a burden to bear.
Mhm. The
So-
old double Kagan. I think we should take a break.
Okay, fantastic.
It's a
I
good
guess.
time to pause.
Well, wait, I do want to say this. Hold on before you haven't done it yet, have you?
I don't
Person on
think
the
he
screen?
has. No,
Okay.
we would know.
So, yeah, before we go, I need to say, we're about to do a part 2. There is going to be a part 2.
Mhm.
And yeah, so look for it, and also know that if you find the part 2, before you see the part 1, I'm going to do the little introduction, not the same one, but some version of the introduction again. And then Arthur will ask me other penetrating questions. Oh, that sounds dirty.
Yes, as your interlocutor.
Yeah. Is
All
that
right.
what you want? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we can end this now.
All right. Now we freeze in a moment of laughter and then we pause it.